Zoological Philosophy, an exposition with regard to the natural history of animals, the diversity of their organization, and the faculties which they derive from it, the physical causes which maintain life within them, and give rise to their various movements. Lastly, those which produce feeling and intelligence in some among them, by J B Lamark. Translated, with an introduction, by Hugh Elliot, author of Modern Science and the Illusions of Professor Bergson, editor of The Letters of John Stuart Mill, etc., etc. Macmillan and Co. Limited, St. Martin's Street, London, 1914. Table of Contents. Introduction. Life. The Philosophie Zooalogique, Zoology, Evolution, Inheritance of Acquired Characteristics, Classification, Physiology, Psychology, Conclusion. Preface. Object of the work, and general observations on the subjects dealt with in it. Preliminary discourse. Some general considerations on the interest of the study of animals and their organization, especially among the most imperfect. Part 1. Considerations on the natural history of animals, their characters, affinities, organization, classification, and species. Chapter 1. On artificial devices in dealing with the production of nature. How schematic classification, classes, orders, families, genera, and nomenclature are only artificial devices. 2. Importance of the consideration of affinities. How a knowledge of the affinities between the known natural productions lies at the base of natural science, and is the fundamental factor in a general classification of animals. 3. Of species among living bodies, and the idea that we should attach to that word. That it is not true that species are as old as nature, and have all been in existence for an equal period, but that it is true that they have been formed one after another, that they have only a relative constancy, and are only invariable temporarily. 4. General principles concerning animals. The actions of animals only take place by means of movements that are stimulated, and not transmitted from without. Irritability is a faculty which they all possess, and is not found except in animals. It is the source of their actions. It is not true that all animals possess feeling, nor the faculty of carrying out acts of will. 5. On the true arrangement and classification of animals. That animals may be arranged, as regards their larger groups, in a series which exhibits a gradually increasing complexity of organization, that the knowledge of the affinities between the various animals is our only guide in determining this series, and that the use of this method dispenses with arbitrary judgments. Lastly, that the number of the lines of demarcation, by which classes are established, has to be increased in correspondence with our knowledge of the different systems of organization, so that the series now presents 14 distinct classes, of great service in the study of animals. 6. Degradation and simplification of organization, from one extremity to the other of the animal chain, proceeding from the most complex to the simplest. That it is a positive fact that on following the animal chain in the usual direction from the most perfect to the most imperfect animals, we observe an increasing degradation and simplification of organization. That, consequently, on traversing the animal scale in the opposite direction, that is to say, in the same order as nature's, we shall find an increasing complexity in the organization of animals, a complexity which would advance with evenness and regularity, if the environmental conditions, mode of life, etc., did not occasion many anomalies in it. 7. Of the influence of the environment on the activities and habits of animals, and the influence of the activities and habits of these living bodies in modifying their organization and structure. How the environment acts upon the organization, general form and structure of animals, how changes subsequently occurring in their environment, mode of life, etc., involve corresponding changes in the activities of animals. Lastly, how a change in the activities, which has become permanent, involves, on the one hand, more frequent use of certain parts of the animal, thus developing and enlarging them proportionally, while, on the other hand, this same change diminishes and sometimes abolishes the use of certain other parts, thus acting unfavourably on their development, reducing them, and finally causing their disappearance. See the additions at the end of Part 1. 8. Of the natural order of animals, and the way in which their classification should be drawn up, so as to be in conformity with the actual order of nature. That the natural order of animals constitutes a series, which we should traverse from the most imperfect animals to the most perfect, in order to be in harmony with the order of nature, for nature did not bring them all into existence at the same moment. Since she had to form them in turn, she was obliged to begin with the simplest, and only proceed at the end with those with the most complex organization. That the classification presented herewith is unquestionably the one that approaches most nearly to the order of nature, so that if there are any corrections to be made in it, it can only be in matters of detail. I believe, for instance, that the naked polyps should form the third order of the case, and the floating polyps the fourth. Additions to the subject matter of chapters 7 and 8. Part 2. An inquiry into the physical causes of life, the conditions required for its existence, the exciting force of its movements, the faculties which it confers on bodies possessing it, and the results of its presence in those bodies. Introduction. Some general considerations on nature, and her power to create life and organization, and subsequently to increase the complexity of the latter. In all these operations, she works only by the action of various moving fluids on supple bodies, which are modified, organized, and animated by these fluids. 1. Comparison of inorganic bodies with living bodies, followed by a parallel between animals and plants. That there is a great difference between living bodies and inorganic bodies. That animals are essentially distinguished from plants by irritability, which is possessed exclusively by the former, and which enables their parts to make sudden movements, repeated as often as they are stimulated by exciting causes, a peculiarity which does not occur in any plant. Table of Contents. Chapter 2. Of life, what it consists of, and the conditions of its existence in a body. That life in itself is a purely physical phenomenon, which gradually gives rise to many other phenomena, and which is due exclusively to the relations existing between the adapted containing parts of a body, the contained fluids moving in them, and the exciting cause of the movements and changes which take place in the body. 3. Of the exciting cause of organic movements. That the organic movements, as also the movements which constitute the actions of animals, are not communicated, but stimulated by the activity of an exciting cause, which is not part of the bodies it animates, and does not perish like them. That this cause resides in the invisible, subtle, expansive fluids, constantly in agitation, which penetrate into, or are incessantly being developed in, the bodies which they animate. 4. Of orgasm and irritability. That the exciting cause of organic movements sets up in the supple parts of living bodies, especially of animals, an orgasm which is essential for the preservation of life, and which, in the case of animals, confers on the parts which possess it the faculty of being irritable. That irritability is a faculty belonging exclusively to the supple parts of animals, that it confers on them the power of producing local manifestations, which are repeated as often as the instigating cause is brought to bear. Lastly, that this faculty is essentially distinct from that of feeling. 5. Of cellular tissue, regarded as the matrix in which an organization has been cast. That cellular tissue is the universal matrix of all organization, and that the movement of fluids in this tissue is the means employed by nature for the creation and gradual development of the organs, at the expense of the tissue in question. 6. Of direct or spontaneous generation. That, since all living bodies are productions of nature, she must herself have organized the simplest of such bodies, endowed them directly with life, and with the faculties peculiar to living bodies. That, by means of these direct generations, formed at the beginning both of the animal and vegetable scales, nature has ultimately conferred existence on all other living bodies in turn. 7. Of the immediate results of life in a body. That it is not true that living bodies have the faculty of resisting the laws and forces to which all non-living bodies are subject, nor that they are controlled by laws peculiar to themselves, but, on the contrary, that it is true that the laws which regulate the changes occurring in bodies meet with very different conditions in living bodies from those that they find in lifeless bodies, and hence work upon the former results very different from those worked upon the latter. That living bodies have the faculty of building up their own substance for themselves, and thus forming combinations which would never have come into existence without them. Hence, their remains furnish the material which serves for the formation of the various minerals. 8. Of the faculties common to all living bodies. That life endows all bodies which possess it with certain faculties in common, and that the production of these faculties requires no special organ whatever, but only such a state of things in the parts of these bodies as may enable life to exist in them. 9. Of the faculties peculiar to certain living bodies. That, in addition to the faculties conferred by life on all living bodies, some living bodies have faculties which are altogether peculiar to themselves. Now, observation shows that these latter faculties only arise when special organs, capable of producing them, exist in the animals possessing such faculties. Summary of Part 2. Part 3. An inquiry into the physical causes of feeling, into the force which produces actions, and lastly, into the origin of the acts of intelligence observed in various animals. Introduction. Some general observations on the means possessed by nature for giving rise in living bodies to the phenomena known as sensations, ideas, and the various acts of intelligence. 1. Of the nervous system, its formation, and the various sorts of functions that it can fulfill. That the system of organs, called the nervous system, is limited to certain animals, and that among those which possess it, it is found in different degrees of complexity and perfection. That this system confers on some animals only the faculty of muscular movement, on others this faculty together with that of feeling, and on others again these two faculties together with that of forming ideas, and of carrying out by this means various acts of intelligence. That the system of organs under examination fulfills 4 very different kinds of functions, but only when it has reached a complexity sufficient to give it the power of doing so. 2. Of the nervous fluid. That there is developed in the bodies of certain animals a very subtle, invisible, containable fluid, remarkable for the rapidity of its movements, that this fluid has the faculty of exciting muscular movement, and that by its means nerves which are affected produce feeling, that, when its entire mass is agitated, it gives rise to inner emotions, and that finally it is the singular agent by which ideas and all intellectual acts are formed. 3. Of physical sensibility and the mechanism of sensations. That it is not true that any matter, or any part of a living body, can have in itself the faculty of feeling, but that it is true that feeling is a phenomenon resulting from the functions of a special system of organs capable of giving rise to it. That feeling is the result of action upon the subtle nervous fluid of an affected nerve, which is propagated throughout the nervous fluid of the sensitive system, and is terminated by a general reaction which is carried back to the individual's inner feeling and to the point affected. 4. Of the inner feeling, the emotions that it may experience, and the power which it thence derives for the production of actions. That the inner feeling results from the totality of internal sensations produced by the vital movements, and from the fact that all parts of the nervous fluid are in communication so far as to form a single, though divided, whole, which is capable of acquiring those general agitations termed emotions. that this inner feeling is the bond of union between the physical and moral, and the origins of both. That the feeling in question on the one hand acquaints the individual with sensations that he experiences, whence the physical, and, on the other hand, gives him consciousness of his ideas and thoughts, whence the moral, and, lastly, as a result of emotions aroused by needs, causes the individual to act without any participation of his will, whence instinct. Table of Contents, Chapter 5. Of the force which produces the actions of animals, and of certain peculiar facts resulting from the use of this force. That since muscular action is a power fully adequate for the production of the movements performed by animals, and since nervous influence is able to excite that muscular action, such animals as have physical feeling possess in their inner feeling a power quite capable of driving to the muscles the fluid which excites their movements. And it is in fact by its emotions that this feeling obtains the force to work the muscles.